I'm the Deputy Commanding General for Civil and Emergency Operations. I do civil works for the entire nation and emergency operations for the nation from a Corps of Engineers perspective as well.
You made that decision a year ago this week that it was one of the more difficult ones. Where does it rank in the decisions that you've made in your professional career?
Probably in the top 10% of challenging decisions. In this case, as you may have seen some other media events, I've said it was neither easy nor hard, just a grave decision. In that if I didn't make this decision to operate the levees, I'm fairly well convinced it would have broken somewhere else. And I did make the decision, but I recognize as I did do that 130,000 acres were going to go underwater, and a lot of people's lives were going to be impacted. So it was a grave decision.
And a year later, do you still feel like it was the right call?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. There was no other way to address the emergency. Once the forecast went from 61.2, 61.3 to 63, there was no way we were going to hold back another 2.5 foot of water.
Did you feel like, I know that you feel like you had much of a choice other than to activate the floodway?
I thought I had a choice up until the forecast changed. We were right at the point, 61.2. So if we didn't have that last bit of localized rain that just fell right over the system, I don't know what the answer would have been in regards to making that decision. So I was right on the cusp of whether to operate or not. And then after that rainstorm that night that went through, that was the game changer.
Was it a decision that you agonized over because there were so many pressures pulling you in so many different ways, and people trying to convince you on both sides of the issue? How much agonizing did you do over that decision?
But one of the reasons why I moved a motor vessel, Mississippi, up into that area, so that I could be on the ground and see the impacts to the levees and the flood walls. And so I spent the 2 or 3 days prior to operating it just looking at the seepages over at Hickman, Kentucky. Saw what was happening at the Cairo flood walls. Saw the biggest sand boil that any of us have ever seen in certain areas. And so I kind of had a feel of how the systems were holding up, and recognizing we were just on the cusp. And so I don't know if agonizing is the right word. More of an engineering review and analysis. And then again, after that rainfall hit, there was no other choice.
In a lot of media coverage, I think even in ours at one point, that it was sort of presented as Cairo versus the floodway, people versus land. I came to learn later that really wasn't accurate, was it?
No, and frankly, that made me angry in some areas that people made it as simple as Cairo versus 130,000 acres, because that was not that was misinformation. What the system was designed back in the 1920s as a system, and that was the confluence area. And so what we're looking for was maintaining the integrity of the system, and not saving Cairo or Hickman or New Madrid, but how does the system operate in and of itself? And so I think those folks that were trying to make we're saving Cairo to flood this area just either didn't understand or were putting out misinformation.
And do you feel like that maybe some of that was intentional to apply pressure one way or the other?
I don't know, why the motives of doing that. I'll just assume that they may have heard that, something that came up from word of mouth from the 1940s or something. But that was not the case. And even as General Peabody's repairing the system now, he's looking at it as the confluence area. You can't put one part of the system up to 61 feet when across the river, you don't have that the same level of protection. So the confluence area needs to be treated as a system, and the system will be brought up as a system. I look at rivers and river floods as it brings people together. Some folks look at it as rivers keep people apart. I think that's inaccurate, and that rivers bring people together.
Describe for me those few days leading up to the decision.
Well, certainly it was a lot of. It was not only at New Madrid, Cairo area, the confluence area, but we were also having challenges down at the mouth of the Mississippi. We had to open up the Bonnie Carey spillway, and we also had some serious challenges, as you remember, down in Memphis, and then in Greenville. So what was good is I had the motor vessel there as my headquarters in the New Madrid area, and I had a plane available to me there. I was able to fly down and check things out at Vicksburg and Baton Rouge and New Orleans. So there were some long days, but I've had longer, more challenging ones.
Do you feel like the decision to activate the floodway, do you believe that it's possible that your decision and the actions of the Corps saved lives?
Oh, there's no. Yes, I think it did. Similar flows. Back in 27, there were 500 fatalities. This is in 27 when our nation didn't have the population that it has now. So I think if we didn't operate the system as designed, it would have been a deadly flood as opposed to just a catastrophic flood.
Was it the worst flood that you'd ever dealt with?
It is the worst one that I've dealt with from size perspective. 2 million cubic feet per second is huge, but I've been working flood since I've been a lieutenant colonel, and whatever flood affects you is the worst that you have. So I've worked floods in Pajaro, in California, and I've worked the Cedar River when Cedar Rapids went underwater. I worked alongside the folks up at Fargo Moorhead the 2 years that they were putting sandbags up. So I've had a lot of challenging floods. This one was the largest one.
Did you even for a second consider waiting a day or two longer on that morning of May 2nd with the Cairo gauge at 61 feet and rising, or do you still believe that time was a huge factor and you couldn't wait any longer?
Yeah, no, we were done in regards to waiting on time. There were, if anything, I might have made the decision a little bit earlier. So I certainly wouldn't have waited any longer.
And do you still feel like and believe that the floodway activated as designed?
Oh, it did. There's discussions that we had to bring in different munitions because we had not enough supply to operate the outflows. But we were able. But the manholes were in place. 1,000-foot 6-inch pipe were all in place. So everything I think operated as designed. People will point out, well, we didn't have enough munitions. Well, yeah, that's true, but we're able to get the munitions in there on time and able to fill the things that we needed to. Other people, well, we didn't make it exactly 200 or 2,000 feet shorter than what it was originally designed. I think that's working at the edges. The concept was to fill the manholes, the pipes full of slurry mix, and explode them and operate them, and that's the main concept, and that's what worked.
How much did the people living in the floodway and working, and the fact that that was prime agricultural land, weigh into your decision, or as an engineer, did you have to sort of remove that from the equation?
No, it was certainly part of the decision that made it grave. I'm flooding. People's houses were still there, their farms and out structures. So I mean, I knew I was affecting their livelihood in regards as farmers, as well as the structures they had in the place. So that did certainly play in my thoughts.
I think floodways like the Birds Point New Madrid floodway are still effective flood fighting tools.
Absolutely. Prior to the Mississippi River Tributaries project, the nation had its theory of levees only. And what happened over time is we would bring the levees higher and higher and higher, depending on the previous floods and the histories that we're working on. After the 27 flood, General Jalwin said we need to make room for the river. Just going higher on the levees is not going to be the solution. And so this project, Mississippi River Tributaries Project, creates room for the river where you can move water around, like at Birds Point, like at Moganza, and the Bonnie Carry. So there's room for this river for floods, and it's something we also have out in Sacramento on the American River. They have a YOLO bypass that when water gets to a certain height, you move it off of the river into other areas. So it's not only here in the Mississippi, but it's in other portions of that country as well.
Do you have any regrets, or in hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently, either personally or the Corps itself?
Well, we're still writing up lessons learned and how we can do things better. I know General Peabody is looking at the slurry mix. Can we come up with some other methods to explosively operate the system? I would also consider, is there a non-explosive method of operating the system like we have down in the Bonnie Carry and the Morganza? So there's some lessons learned that folks are working through and figuring out how we can put the system together so it'll be more effective if we have to use it again.